My husband and I have been sheltering at home since March 16th. So we are in our 8th week of togetherness. And I have to tell you, I have the best husband in the whole world. No, really. And it's not like I am, whatever you want, honey type of mate. But my husband is he is extraordinarily agreeable. Example, I'm working in my office and I can't get anything to back up. Hank, can you come and help me back up my computer or look at it later? Hold on, he says. I'll be right there. Agreeable. Or agreeableness not even solicited. He'll bring me coffee. Here, I brought you a cup of coffee. And he has exactly the way I like it. It's not as if he is just standing around waiting for me to give him some kind of a honey-do list. The man is very active. He bikes, he hikes. He's a voracious reader. He has probably one of the richest interior lives of anyone I know, and he can express himself in thoughtful ways about people and history. So it's wonderful being around him. And I admit that part of me puts all this agreeableness in the emotional container that is labeled all needs fulfilled for Ethel. Now, I know this is self-centered. I'm not guaranteeing any kind of maturity, but this kind of agreeableness and kindness, my husband loves me. I am cherished by my husband. I am walking around in this bubble of bliss in the house. And I can really go with this because not only does he love me, but he loves me best. And then I remember the last time this happened to me, this bliss bubble that I was in. It was probably about 20 years ago. It was extraordinary. He wasn't being the same. He wasn't jumping into gleeful gossip with me anymore. He didn't come home with a list of grievances about his coworkers, or he wasn't berating the TV commentators like he usually did. He was just being so kind. That was about the time he started bringing coffee up to my office, unsolicited. And it wasn't like he brought the coffee and said, well, while I'm here, would you make these copies or would you type this up for you? Just brought me the coffee. One more example of extreme kindness. It was a time when I was going to visit my mother. We were in New Jersey. She was in a nursing home. She was declining. And it was sometimes difficult to visit her. It either could be like a pearl in the necklace of understanding that she and I were stringing together, or it could be gut-wrenching because she was very unhappy. So one day I'm getting ready to go visit her and I'm getting the car keys and I had some flowers to bring her and I'm looking in my pockets for little bits of compassion. And Hank says, hold up, I'll go with you today. Oh, that would be so great. He said, yeah, well, both my parents are gone and your mother is still with you. You're lucky to have her with you. And, it might be a tough visit. So this would be easy for you if someone else is with you. Yeah, definitely kind. So here we are 20 years later. And I'm thinking back to that time. And I'm thinking how that was a wonderful visit with my mother. And the next day we're having breakfast. And in New Jersey, we had this little breakfast nook. And the sun would come in the morning and I'm still in my bliss bubble. And Hank is making breakfast. He puts my plate in front of me and then he sits down with his plate. And I said, Hank, I have to tell you, thank you. Not just for breakfast, but you've been so kind to me. And I just really appreciate it. Mm-hmm. So he's digging into his breakfast and he's cutting his egg. He always had eggs sunny side up and he would cut it and the yolk would like seep all over the plate and go over to his toast and get all soggy, but that's the way he likes it. And so then he looks at me and he reaches to the middle of the table and he picks up this piece of wood, little bitty piece of wood. And he said, do you remember this? And I said, oh yeah, I got that years ago at a retreat. I don't know if you can see, it says kindness on it. I said, yeah, well, I decided to start doing that. "Oh, Hank, that's what I felt." And he said, "Yeah, I felt it too. I've even been doing it at work." He said, "I tried it with my boss and she and I are getting along. And I did it with my coworkers and we're not so behind on the schedule." He said, "I even did it on the way home on the train." Oh, oh, I said, it wasn't just me. I sounded petulant, but I had to laugh because I had said, "Oh, I thought you were just spoiling me with kindness." And I realized he had enough to go around. So I think of that today, 20 years later, and he's doing it again. He's being really kind. And we are also in the midst of a pandemic. And we are in the midst of international and national social and political and racial inequities, huge inequities. And it's confusing and it's scary. And I know people's nerves are frayed, to say the least. Many of my daily comforts have been ripped away. And I know there are people that didn't have those comforts to begin with. So it must be really scary. What can I do? I can reach for this. I can reach for this like it's a talisman, my little piece of wood, and I can be kind. Now, it's easy enough to be kind most of the time with my family and my friends because we have shared values. We have history. So, we're used to working things out. It's not so easy with people that I don't really know that well, that I maybe don't understand. Maybe they don't understand me. You know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to reach for my little kindness. I can make a commitment to be kind to everyone. Now, granted, it won't always work, but what I do is I start with myself. And it's not as self-centered as you might think, because if I feel that I've been kind to myself, I know how good that feels. The knots go away from my stomach and I breathe a little easier. So I can try to be willing to share that with other people. I can be like Ben's bells in action. Coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, yesterday Hank sent me an article on an email that he had read online. And it was about this doctor in British Columbia. Her name is Dr. Bonnie Henry. And she is a foremost doctor in British Columbia. And on March 17th, she held a press conference. And she had some medical recommendations, and she had some very strong medical recommendations for shutting down, lockdown, quarantining, social distancing. And because she was quite knowledgeable and credible, had been over the years in her field, people listened to her and they took those recommendations. And British Columbia was not clobbered like it could have been. It was a great press conference. And I thought, oh, this is really nice. And yet the most important thing, and she said this, the most important thing in her press conference, she said at the end, she said, "This is our time to be kind, to be kind, to be calm, and to be safe. Be kind."
So I've realized that my travel stories mark my privilege. As a brown woman from a working class family, I know my privilege is different than white travelers. My privilege is different from Black travelers. My privilege is different from men or the rich or people with relatives who gift frequent flyer miles. The privilege spectrum is a sliding scale, and depending on where I happen to travel, my position as a brown woman slides along that scale. The privileges I'm allotted while traveling as a brown person through Norway to camp on Arctic beaches is different from the privilege I experienced moving through crowded markets in Bangladesh as a relatively white-skinned person. I can see it and feel it now, but I was oblivious to this sliding scale for many years. And I think it's because I didn't start off as a traveling person. Growing up in Chicago, we didn't take family spring break trips to Jamaica or the Bahamas like so many of the rich kids in our junior high and high school who would come back tanned and have their blonde hair in cornrows. Instead, we explored Chicago's Chinatown and Polish neighborhoods and Greek restaurants. My dad took us out to all the taxi cab joints where Pakistani cab drivers and Nigerian cab drivers ate. He thought it was the best part of Chicago. If we had the money, my parents and sisters and I went to the St. Louis Arch, the Michigan Sand Dunes, and I realize now that my dark-skinned Indian father and my light-skinned Italian mother never took us further south than the Kentucky Derby by design. The first time I really traveled was way south, and it was as an adult at 18, driving to Daytona Beach for spring break with my best friend. And I remember that moment, the awe of driving from frozen Chicago in March and seeing palm trees for the first time from the window of my little Honda Civic hatchback. And that's when I realized that I could move from point A to B, that there was no magic about it, and that it was accessible to even people like me. And since then, I've jumped at any chance I had to win grants or conduct research or present at conferences, from Mexico to Thailand, from the Netherlands to India. I lived 5 years in Bolivia, exploring the Andes, the Amazon tributaries, the salt flats, and the rich mix of indigenous cultures. I did the same thing in Mexico, taking 5 years to wander from Juarez to the Yucatan Peninsula. I reveled in how light and free it feels to travel alone, to not answer to anyone, to make my own itinerary. And I enjoy the slow exploration of places when I get to stay for weeks or months or even years, moving from country to country by train when I can, or plane if I have to. But it did take 20 years of traveling the world and a PhD dissertation on refugee apologies to really dig into how privilege has shaped my mobility. I have a little blue book with the United States of America stamped on it that gets me through borders, and I speak English. Those two tools that I took for granted have allowed me to move freely across this planet. Now, my work with Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh has highlighted the arbitrary absurdity that dictates how and why some of us are allowed to move and some aren't. For 4 years, I've been traveling to Bangladesh for my PhD in human geography and women and gender studies at the University of Toronto. In Bangladesh, I met Khaleda. She teaches elementary school English in the world's largest refugee camp, where she lives with 1 million other Rohingya refugees. She's 27 years old and she has a 2-year-old son. She's gentle and she speaks softly with a round face and big eyes. Sometimes she wears a hijab, sometimes she wears a burqa, depending on where we're going, which is always inside the camp borders. She's the youngest elected representative of her community and the only elected female representative of the entire 1 million-person camp. She's been working for years to fight police brutality against her community and to support women's education. Khaleda has a dream to start a community library. She also speaks 4 languages, and she learned English by watching shows on her cell phone. She's super impressive. And Khaleda does have vagabond dreams. But because she's been rendered stateless by the Myanmar government, she isn't allowed to travel outside her cramped refugee camp. And listening to Khaleda's dreams to see London or to see New York triggered my ongoing exploration into why I get to move and she doesn't. So I met Khaleda in 2017 during my first trip to the Rohingya camps. When I first went to Bangladesh, I had no idea what to expect. And she really helped me through all the twists and turns of this massively growing temporary city. So she told me about a story of a year before I met her in 2016. Khaleda and her family all together had a fantastic opportunity to relocate to Australia all together. So like I said, Khaleda and millions of other stateless Rohingya, they have no passports. They have no state authority to vouch for them as they move through borders. So moving to Australia through the UN resettlement process is the only opportunity Khaleda and her family had to legally move out of the camp. And only a few people got that opportunity back in 2016. After the paperwork was done, they were all ready to go, and Khaleda's father fell ill. So she, as the eldest daughter, decided to stay and care for him while he was sick, thinking she would catch up with her family later, that both of them would go later when he was well enough to travel. And just like that, her family moved on, and that was the last time she ever saw them. because that window of opportunity, that whole UN program just shut with no explanation, no warning, leaving Kaleda and her father in the camp where she still lives today. And so these days, I just came back from the camp in November, and coronavirus hit, a few months after that. But now I talked to Kaleda, and she said they can barely even move around inside the camp because coronavirus is spreading through basically the city, around the camp villages and inside the camp, which is now called the COVID red zone by the Bangladeshi government. But the camp itself is an experience that people that I've worked with in those camps that have been to Afghanistan, to Yemen, to Uyghur camps in China, they've never seen anything like this camp. It's the largest camp in the world with 1 million people, a population that matches Albuquerque, where I am now. There's only 10 square meters of space per person, which is 1/4 of the 40 square meters per person required by the United Nations. But people are just so crammed in there, and there's no more space to go. 15 people can live crammed into a 150 square foot shed. And these tiny, tiny sheds made with little tin roofs and bamboo sticks and just plastic sides, they stretch endlessly into the distance. And from the top of a hill, it looks like a painted backdrop of like an apocalyptic movie. And the Rohingya, who are hardworking communities of farmers and fishers, have been made dependent on aid since they're not allowed to work or to move on to other countries, even if they have family or job prospects somewhere else. So, and my research looks at how Bangladeshi populations living near the camp are impacted by aid policies that don't serve them, but still affect them. Like, for example, how dealing with the deforestation and water scarcity linked to containing 1 million people is impacting the people that were already living there. So I've been going back there for 4 years, and after my second visit to the camps in January 2018, I decided to live there, and I found a local Bangladeshi family that would host me, and they are mostly women and babies since the men were working in different cities or countries. So in the beginning, the women I lived with, two of them, two of many, Nishi and Rumi, were their names, they constantly asked me all the time, "You go anywhere you want by yourself?" And they looked at me as if I just landed in their backyard on a flying carpet. It was incredulous to people, especially to women who had never had the chance to even leave that village. But they knew every single corner of that village. And although they were not all blood relatives, they were more deeply involved in each other's families and caring for the children of people in the entire village who just could come through and eat and sleep and get help with whatever they needed. They were more of a family than most families I've ever known anywhere else in the world. Living there, I had a room with a big carved wood bed, a squat toilet, which was just like a hole in the ground, and a bucket shower. And for 2 years, I watched the rice paddy outside my window change from a dry, trash-strewn dirt patch to sparkling flooded paddy in the monsoon season, to green rice, and then back to dirt. And I watched as the vegetable plot behind the house, that was the main vegetable plot for a group of widows, was taken over by an NGO and then turned into a toilet production site for the camp, which left all those families and the widows without place to grow their food, and also leaving them without toilets. And this was how I came upon my research, watching the envy and the anger of poor Bangladeshi farmers who lost their land, lost their grazing land, didn't have toilets, but were watching as right in their backyard, literally in their backyard, NGOs were producing thousands of toilets for their Rohingya neighbors. And this camp, this village that I lived in was only about 5 kilometers from Kaleda's camp, but even being that close, just about 15 minutes away in a bicycle rickshaw, never once could Kaleda visit me at this house. She even had a fake ID that allowed her to reach the town of Cox's Bazar, where most of the NGO workers lived and partied and drank beer and swam in rooftop pools. She could occasionally go through there to visit me, but she risked being arrested and imprisoned if she did. But sure enough, after my second visit, she did risk arrest when she came to see me off at the airport. And then I, with my passport and my English, got on a plane to Singapore, where I wandered museums and ate foods I never knew existed. I went to Istanbul, where I visited mosques and browsed glittering markets. I went to Bordeaux to have wine with my friends from Mexico City. I went to Norway to hike the fjords. I went to Spain to lay around the nude beaches of Caña de Meca. Then to Chicago to be reunited with my family. And by then, after years of this, I began to feel disoriented. And sometimes for the first few seconds after waking up in the morning, I couldn't even tell where I was. Was I in Bali or Singapore, in Italy or Canada? And that's when I knew I needed to really examine why I was moving around so much. Because I've always expressed gratefulness for the chance to travel, especially for traveling alone as a woman. And I've always encouraged women to go where they want, when they want. But now I see how my encouragement of just go where you want is tone deaf, because people can't just go where they want, when they want. My encouragement to just go explore the world is akin to the annoying mantra of choose a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. That can only be the reality for those of us who have total agency over our lives, those of us who have won the global mobility lottery or the actual lottery. After meeting Khaleda and hearing her dreams of visiting London and New York, and also knowing how little chance there is of she and her son ever leaving that camp, I became ashamed of all my Instagram travel posts, my stories of being lost and photos of the food I ate, showing off the textiles I bought from markets around the globe. It felt so frivolous. My mobility privilege hung heavy on me, and especially the shame of passing so many years not understanding what this privilege meant. I even made a second Facebook page to add all my Bangladeshi and Rohingya friends, and I only posted photos of Bangladesh just to make myself feel better, to hide my privilege. I'm also aware of my Western tendency to glorify travel as a badge of experience or having lived in the world, and now I know it's not. Traveling from point A to B is not more valuable than spending a lifetime in point A, putting down roots, getting to know people, building meaningful friendships and relationships. And this Western culture pushes us to value moving on from our homes, which is a contrast now, I see, to the 70 million people who have become refugees, who simply want to go back home or to a place that can become a new home. So now I'm back in Albuquerque just by chance, was pushed out of Spain when coronavirus hit. And I'm spending time in my own home, a little adobe house that I bought 20 years ago. And I'm realizing how deeply grateful I am for this spot, someplace that I don't ever need to move from. But the idea that I can stay where I want is also part of the privilege of mobility, to have agency over when you stop moving. So I still talk with Khaleda and the Bangladeshi family that I lived with when they have internet access. And like many of us right now, they're staying home, wearing masks, homeschooling their kids, washing their hands 20 times a day. And I know if I ever want to see them again, it's up to me to go. And I do want to see them. So I'm not done traveling. I want to continue because I know so many women of color will never enjoy the mobility freedoms that I enjoy. And I also won't stop encouraging women to travel solo. What I will do is check my privilege and be more vocal about my respect for people who live in one place their whole lives, to learn that place and its people deeply. I'll be more vocal about the satisfaction of slow travel, of travel focused on deeper connections, and less on how many passport stamps you collect. And I will be sure to remind my parents of how lucky we were to be able to visit the sand dunes, the St. Louis Arch, and all the days of exploring the deep corner of Chicago as children.
Thank you for this opportunity. I always find it odd that I've been considered a cultural ambassador here in Tucson for a lot of things, where all my life I was basically considered the odd man out. And my story begins with my mother and father. My mother was from the deep South. She was basically raised on a plantation that her grandparents were slaves on. And my father was from South Dallas. He joined the Marine Corps, and my mother joined Job Corps, where she got her nursing degree. They did just like everyone else did. They migrated from the Great Migration from the South to the West Coast. They moved to LA in the 1970s, and that was the beginning of a lot of crime, a lot of the redlining, things of that nature, and they just didn't want that for their kids. So my father was a Marine, and they decided they wanted to take us out of there. The first place they moved us to was Arizona. And I know a lot of people think that Arizona is not a place where there's so much racism touch, but I have to tell you, Arizona is probably the most low-key racist place I've ever lived. I love this city, I love this state, but there's a lot of things that could be done better. So to move on with the story is basically I never really felt comfortable in the States because we moved overseas a lot. We lived in Guam, we lived in Japan, we lived all over, and it was beautiful. I loved it, and I got to experience a lot of different people. I got to learn a lot of different languages, and I got to be me. And it was a beautiful time. And every time we came back to the States, I hated it. I hated it because that's when I really knew that I was different than everybody else. Because on base, everyone was different. Everyone was a little of this, a little of that, from here, from there. So we all had to just get along. And the one thing we had in common was that we were Americans. So that made it a little different. That made it a little easier for everybody. But when we came back to the States, the American part was gone. You were black. You were Latino. You were this. You were that. So the first place we moved when we came to the States was Arizona, Nogales. And Nogales is a border town. And for I know people here on this podcast, they understand what Nogales is, but other people wouldn't understand that it's a town close to the frontera. And that's basically a town that's divided by an imaginary line, which isolates the people, which are really one community. So for me, because I lived there for so long, I learned Spanish. All my friends were Latino. And for the most part, every time we were in the States, we lived there. So I spoke Spanish, and I still speak Spanish. And I had a bit of a kinship with the Latino people of my town. So when we moved overseas one more time. And that last time we moved overseas was when my sister was the age of college. And at that time, we were in Guam. And Guam's college wasn't accredited. So my parents decided to move back to the States, and they decided to move back to Tucson at this time. So that was a culture shock, moving to Tucson for me, because I was used to living in the States where primarily Latinos and nobody else. So when I first went to high school there, we went to Cholla, and people who know what Cholla is. Cholla is a very divided high school by race and color and things of that nature. So for me, I was kind of odd man out. I was basically, as they would say, a black kid. So I spoke Spanish. I hung out with the Latino kids and everything. And literally one day, a black kid came up to me and was like, "What are you doing?" And I was completely confused. I had no idea what he's talking about. Besides dealing with my family and going to like most black families do from the South, where you spend the summers with your family in New York, Alabama, things like that, you trade kids. I didn't have a lot of interactions with other black people. So I went to where I was comfortable with Latinos. And so this kid was like, "What's wrong with you, man?" I said, "What are you doing?" And I was completely confused. He's like, "Why are you hanging out with these Mexicans?" And that was the first time I really realized. I was like, oh, okay, it's different. So from there, that's where I really started to mingle in with black people and understand black people and be around black people all the time, and that's where a lot of changes came into me. That's when I started reading about, Reconstruction, blacks in America, Frederick Douglass, things of that nature, and Western. And that's when I really started to challenge my parents, like most people do at 14, 15, 16, And because my mom was like everyone else, is from the deep South and very religious, Western religion, it came into play, and it came into a big head in my house. I was like, this isn't what we were made for. Western religion and these things, and why is Santeria bad? Why is Candomblé bad? Why is Hoodoo bad? Why is Yoruba bad? Oh, because I said, no, that's propaganda, and these are things that changed my life. So, but on the same token, as a son of a southern black man, you're always raised to be better. So I went into the military. I was in the Marine Corps after that. I became a law enforcement officer, which most people can't believe nowadays. But yeah, I was immigration, and I did a lot of things in law enforcement. And after a while, I just got tired of it. I didn't want to do it anymore. I I I, I said there has to be something else for me. So I quit. I quit, and for 3 years, I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing. I took my pension and I walked around Fourth Avenue and skated. I had some little adventure with some friends. I opened some record stores and things of that. And at this time, somebody came into my life, and something came into my life that changed my outward appearance, my outward perception of the world, basically. And it was a gentleman by the name of Contramestre Dandy Issue. He was a capoeira teacher. And this is the funny part of my story, which I always tell my friends. I was like, this guy was like a Dave Chappelle sketch. He had like an orange aura about him when he walked in a room. And he would see me every day at this bar. And he would come in there, and he had dreadlocks down to the floor. He had a dreaded beard. And he would walk in there, and he'd pass out these flyers to everybody. Hey, come to my class, come to my class. I was like, this bum. I was like, this dude needs to leave me alone. And he'd drink a Guinness, slam the Guinness down on the bar, pass out the flyers, and walk out. He'd be like, hey, black man, come to my class. I'm like, I do, whatever. So this was literally, I would say probably 3 or 4 months of him doing this. Every day, every day. And then finally one day I said, you know what, man? I'll come to your class if you just leave me alone. So I walked with him down the street on 4th Avenue to his school. And it just so happened to be a day of what's called a batizado. It's a day of the big ceremony when you get your belt in this martial arts. And he took me in the back room, and there are all these people sitting in the back room. I mean, looking like the lambs led to the slaughter. I mean, they were sitting on the floor, bug-eyed, doe-eyed, scared out their minds. And there's this big, husky Brazilian dude back there telling them the story about some adventure he had in Brazil. And they are not listening. They're freaked out. And he walks out. And then the black guy, orange aura guy, okay, he walks in and he says, look, everybody, this is of your heritage. This is of your people. We are one tribe, no matter what color, what race you are. This is our Quilombo, our community coming together. And you're going to be all right. And after that, he had me hooked. I didn't miss a class for the first 4 years. And back then, we had class at 7 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I didn't miss a class for about at least 5 years. Not one. Not one. And with that, I joined and started to explore other things. And I went to Brazil, and I went to other countries, and I got opportunities to travel. And I saw blacks in the African diaspora that were basically, we were kinfolk with the deception of being dropped off on another island. That boat just didn't go that far. And walking around Bahia, walking around different parts of Brazil, where I could see myself and other people, and no fear of the differences, which I never really experienced it only when I was in the United States, but everywhere else I didn't. But having that just kind of like filled like a little empty spot, and I was like, I'm going to make sure I can take a piece of this back home. And my goal was always to make sure that capoeira or some form of this type of empowerment of our roots is shown to Black Americans. Because again, we're not a monolithic group, and what I say doesn't go for everybody. But I always felt that because the way we were taken and moved away, that we feel like something's missing and we don't have it. And we have to find it in some way in church, in groups, and things of that. And this is one thing I found that was purely us. So I've dedicated myself to showing it and making sure that we have something that we're proud of, and that's something that is shown to other people to show that you can't wear a crown if your head is down. So that's my story. And with that being said, I have a Casa de Cultural here in town, a place called Movement Culture, and I avidly push that people of those races are the ones who teach those arts. Hawaiians teach my hula, Filipinos teach my eskrima, things like that, because things get so whitewashed and the true, authentic piece of it gets taken away. And I understand that we're America and we're all this giant melting pot, but we can't understand, we can't enjoy the flavor if we don't know which each ingredient really is.
I'm going to tell the story of La Vieja. Now, the setting for this is while I was serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in El Salvador from 2007 to 2010. Now, during my time, I lived in a small village, Caserío Santa Paula, that sat nestled along the side of the Pan American Highway. It was a beautiful community, rural, covered in cornfields and bean. And there were also stretches of the community that were completely covered by jungle and forest. One such area was a stretch of the old Pan American Highway that everyone in the community referred to as La Vieja. Now, at one point, all traffic that was going from one part of Central America to the other would pass by on this road. But about 30 years ago, the road was abandoned for a new one that was just built. And from that time on, the jungle and the forest began to retake that road. And that is what you see behind me right now, La Vieja. What it had turned into was a completely overgrown piece of land with different spots of asphalt left over, reminiscent of its former life as a main highway. But it had slowly become a trail through one of the darkest parts of the community. Now, during the day, it was absolutely beautiful. There were large Conacaste trees with their bead-like seeds that would fall all over the ground. There was shade given from forest and tropical trees alike. It was a really cool place to walk through during the day. But at night, things changed a little bit. At night, everything was dark. You went from this really bright area to a really dark and eerie sight. But along that path, I saw some of the most beautiful things in my life. After the first rainfall, you would have the birth of these brand new lightning bugs. And I remember one night walking along La Vieja and feeling as if I was walking into the universe. I was surrounded by thousands of lightning bugs surrounding me on all sides, going deep into the jungle. All I could see was these shining, shimmering lights, and I felt like I was literally walking through space. It was an amazing experience. Then there were other times where the experiences weren't so miraculous. There was one time where I was walking home from my host mom. She was my Salvadoran mother that took care of me. And I was walking from her house to my friend's house to eat some cusuco, some armadillo, which was a common dish, traditional dish down there. And so I had to walk along La Vieja at night. And as I'm walking, out of nowhere, I heard a rustling, and I looked, and this small white dog creature ran out of the bushes and ran in a circle around me. And I could hear its nails, its claws digging into the ground, and I could hear it huffing and puffing. It ran in a circle around me and ran right back into the bushes. I had never seen anything like that before. I thought it might have been a dog, maybe a rabbit. I had no clue. So I thought it was weird. Got to my buddy's house, and he's making the table and getting everything ready for dinner. And I told him the story. And he's like, "Oh, you saw the cadejo blanco?" Now, I spoke Spanish, but I had never heard the word cadejo before. And so I asked him, like, what is the cadejo? And he goes on to tell me that it's Mayan lore, that it's a small white dog-like creature that runs in a circle around you to protect you from imminent evil. It's a good spirit that's meant to protect good people. Freaked me out in the moment. I didn't feel like I was being protected, but I was very thankful because he also told me about the cadejo blanco, or the cadejo negro, the black cadejo, which is the one that comes out and wants to hurt people. So like I said, beautiful pathway, but some weird experiences. But there was one experience that stands out more than the rest. Now, this was another late night, closer to midnight. I was just leaving La Última of a family friend that had passed away. So La Última is a year after their death. You get together with the family, drink coffee, and you eat sweet bread and just congregate and talk and celebrate their lives. So I'm walking back close to midnight by myself, back along La Vieja, dark as usual with a few stars just piercing the canopy over my head. And as I'm walking forward, at the end of this long pathway, there's a street lamp. And that street lamp has on both sides tall corn stalks. Now, these corn stalks grow twice as tall as normal corn stalks because they get sun all day and then light from the lamp at night. So they don't produce corn, but they grow up to 10 or 12 feet. Now, what this did is near that street lamp, they cast a long shadow. So as I'm walking, I see the outline of a young woman, which was really weird. I knew everyone on that side of the village, and there were not a lot of young women, much less young women that would be walking by themselves at midnight in rural El Salvador. And as I'm watching her, I couldn't quite tell who it was. Her shape was going in and out of the light. So I'd see her from the light on the lamp, just her shadow, and then she'd walk into the shadows of the corn stalks. So I could see her shape kind of coming into view and then fading. Until finally she got to the end of La Vieja. And right there was what was called a palanquera, which is basically a U-shaped piece of wood that would allow people to pass through, but not cows. And from that palanquera, there was a fork in the road. You can either take the path upward, and you can go to the new Pan American Highway, and I could walk along that road and get to my house. The other path down below would take you down by a creek, a densely covered forest, and then you'd come out into a cornfield, walk through the cornfield, then hop a wall, and you could get to my house. Now, as soon as that young lady got to the palanquera, she stopped dead in her tracks, and she turned around and looked right at me. Now, that was odd because I was at least 70 yards behind her. And from my perspective, there was no way she could have known that I was behind her. So she stopped and turns, and then turns back and goes and takes the path to the right up to the new Pan American Highway. Now, at this point, I'm starting to get a little nervous. I'm thinking, you know, along the Pan American, it's known that people will get robbed. So I'm thinking to myself, you know, I don't have a lot, but I still would not want to get robbed at this point. So my thought was maybe she has some friends hiding in the bushes up there or something. So as I get to this fork in the road, that's what I'm thinking about, one path. Then I start thinking about that lower path. If there are thieves up there that are getting ready to rob me, maybe I should take this other path where I'd go down through a forest, over a creek, through a cornfield, and to my house. But then I started thinking, what if there was by some far-fetched chance, some type of evil thing? Of course they'd want me to go by myself to this creek and be in the middle of this cornfield at midnight. So I decided to take my chances with the thieves. So I pick up a large rock that was sitting right there next to the trail, and I hold it in my hand as if that was going to defend me against a gun. And so I slowly walk up the path. And at the top of the hill, that young lady is standing there by herself. I get closer and closer. I'm looking around in the bushes and I don't see anyone, so I drop the rock and I reach for my cell phone and I turn on the light. Now, as I'm walking, I want to get an idea of who it is, so I turn the light in her face and I say, "Buenas, good evening." And as soon as I said that, the light shone down. And what I saw was a face that was contorted, deformed, something I had never seen, something that did not look human. And in that moment, I don't think I was staring for more than 0.4 of a second. But in that moment, my heart started beating, I started sweating, and I instantly got scared. I put the lamp down, said, "Have a nice night," and took off running down the Pan American Highway. The entire time as I'm going down the Pan American, I'm praying, "Lord, please don't let her be standing on my porch or inside of my house." I get to my house and thank God she's not there. Needless to say, I did not have a great night of sleep. So the next day, I walk along this same path, but this time it's illuminated by the bright sun. And I walk back to my host mom's site, Blanca's house. And I get there and her mother, who's pushing 90 at the time, she's sitting there in the hammock in the front yard, and I go up to her and I tell her, "Niña Loli, I saw something crazy last night," and I proceed to tell her the story. She leans back in her hammock and she looks at me. She's like, "That was the Siguanaba." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she proceeds to tell me the story of the Siguanaba, which is an evil spirit that appears as a young woman. And when you get closer, it turns into a demon and carries you off. Now, the Siguanaba typically targets men who are not faithful. But what she told me is that she deemed me a faithful man, so decided only to scare me instead of taking me away. But she proceeded to tell me that they used to come out, these spirits used to show themselves to people a lot more before electricity and everything came into the community. So I should count myself Scared, but also fortunate that I was able to interact with this ancient spirit. And that is the story of La Vieja.
It was election night. My wife was supposed to cook us dinner at about 6 o'clock, but at 5:30, she walked in and told me it wasn't going to happen. Why not? I said. Because Donald Trump is the president and he might still be the president tomorrow, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and if he wins, we'll all be dead. Okay, I wasn't quite sure how that related to the roast chicken with Yukon potatoes I had been looking forward to all day, but it had been a long year. Between the pandemic and the political climate, my wife Debbie and I felt like the world was falling apart. Due to the stress of Trump world, we've both been on a Merlot IV since 2016. So I didn't question my wife, which is the secret to a successful marriage, by the way. I just suggested we pick up some takeout food at our pandemic kitchen, the trusty La Conda Portofino restaurant, which is only a 5-minute ride away. My wife agreed. She was glued to the TV anyway, watching nervous newscasters and poll experts. Truthfully, she would have agreed to popcorn and vodka for dinner. So I placed the order, hop in my Tesla, and drive to the restaurant. You notice I didn't say car, I said Tesla. Why? Well, for the same reason people who attended an Ivy League school say when I was at Harvard as opposed to when I was at college. They want you to know. I feel that way about my Tesla. All my life, I've had okay cars, Chevrolets and Pontiacs and Toyotas and a Lexus or two, but they were all gas-guzzling, boxy, practical transportation with boring electronics. I had just turned 65. I had worked hard all my life, and I wanted to buy myself a flashy toy, and I can't afford a private jet or a young Asian mistress, so I settled on the Tesla. A black-on-black Model 3. It's fast as hell. It's got a fancy keyboard, a fancy onboard computer, and it'll let me watch Netflix and do 10 other weird things that I'll never use. But most importantly, it's cool. So I pull my cool black Tesla into the restaurant parking lot. Now, one benefit of a pandemic, restaurants have gotten fabulous at takeout food. I head past the parking lot, which now doubles as al fresco dining. I go to the takeout area, pick up my prepaid bag of linguine with pesto and penne norma, and I'm back in the Tesla 3 minutes. It's perfect, easy. I feel the bag, the food is piping hot. I put my foot in the brake and shift into drive. Nothing happens. The car will not turn on. Excuse me, did I say car? I meant to say the Tesla malfunction, but that's okay. Nothing is perfect. The Tesla is close, but it's still a machine and a computer as well. And everyone knows sometimes you have to reboot a computer. So it's exactly what I did. I rebooted my Tesla. It's actually kind of cool. You press this little scroll thing right on the steering wheel, and at the same time, the whole giant dash goes black for like 2 minutes to build suspense. And then all of a sudden, all the lights and the bells and the whistles come roaring back, and the Tesla is as good as new. But tonight, it's not as good as new. It still won't start. Truth be told, at this point, I'm getting a little ticked at Elon Musk, but still willing to give the man a little slack. Maybe when my Model 3 was on the line, Elon was working out some kinks on his new spaceship, or smoking too much weed, like the time he thought of his new baby son's name, Axe Esh A12. That's some pretty good weed. Anyway, this was still a good oops. I almost said the C word. What I meant to say that I still had complete faith in my electronic vehicle. So I took out my black card. The black card, as any Tesla owner knows, is the card you can use to start your vehicle if you don't have your phone. Or if you want to trust your car to a valet, you don't flip a valet a key, you give them the shiny, elegant Onyx card with the Tesla logo. How cool is that? Well, unfortunately, it's not cool at all tonight. It doesn't work. A dark thought crosses my mind. When I had my Chevys, Pontiacs, Toyotas, and Lexuses, I never remember any of those cars dying after a 5-minute ride. But like I said, those were cars. This was an electronic vehicle which meant I had 2 more options. I could reprogram my phone to the Bluetooth, which I did, double check the connection, which I did, and then I could start the car from a special manual app on the phone's Tesla app. This was definitely going to work. Here's what happened next. Nothing. My Tesla did not work, did not make a sound, not a beep. My electronic vehicle could now also accurately be referred to as a piece of shit. I hated Elon Musk at that moment. I had no choice but to do the unthinkable. Call for a tow. When I got the Tesla dispatcher on the phone, he was at the place mentally I was a half hour ago. Teslas don't break. I must have done something wrong. He insisted we go through some of the same steps again with him on the phone, but his presence made no magical difference when I rebooted the computer, reset the Bluetooth, tried to start the car with my phone, or used the suddenly silly-looking Tesla Black card. Well, he said expertly, that sucks, and told me a tow truck would be there in about 20 minutes. So I call my wife, dial a number on the Bluetooth. Trump's still president, she said, picking up, sounding worried, and I'm hungry. Where are you? Well, I explained to her that the Tesla had disappointed me, had disappointed our family, and that a tow truck had been dispatched. Maybe it's a bad omen, she said. Maybe it means more horrible news is coming tonight. I laughed. I don't think the fate of the Western world is tied to the efficiency of our Model 3. And here's where the story gets even weirder. I asked my wife where the gloves were in the car. I assumed I was going to ride with the tow truck driver, and I wanted to wear additional protection in the cab besides my mask. They're in the back, she told me. I know that's where they're supposed to be, I said, but they're not there. Well, I decided to look in a storage area near the center console. I popped it open, and I peeked inside. That's strange, I said to my wife. When did you start smoking Marlboros? Oh my God, she gasped. And then she said what I was about to say myself. I think you're in the wrong car. So I immediately got out of my electric vehicle, walked 3 feet, and there was my electric vehicle. 2 exactly the same black on black 2020 model Tesla 3s parked 6 inches apart. The reason I was able to get into the wrong car must have been because the owner was sitting at a table 3 feet away. His phone wasn't far enough to lock his Tesla. Well, I walk back to the now stranger's electric vehicle, and I hear my wife laughing hysterically on the speakerphone. I'll see you in 5 minutes, I say, and I hang up. I grab my dinner, I shut the door, and I come face to face with this giant dude with a clipboard standing next to a giant tow truck. Is the car we're towing, he says. Not exactly, I reply. Hey, is there a problem? A 50-year-old guy coming from the restaurant suddenly says to me, sounding kind of pissed off. Is this your Tesla? I answer curtly, trying to sound a little accusing, like he did something wrong. Yeah, what about it? He says, getting in my face, a little too close, especially for a pandemic. This the car we're towing, the tow truck driver says, again? I take a deep breath and turn to my new captive audience of 2. Weird thing, guys. I accidentally got into this Tesla instead of mine because it was dark and unlocked. There's no problem. I'm just going to get into my car now and go. How long were you in my car, the middle-aged guy says. Did you do anything to it? Somebody should have canceled the tow truck guy says. I got to get paid. And here's where my Tesla Model 3 redeemed itself. It started right up. Sorry for the confusion, guys. Have a good night, I smiled, and I peeled out of the parking lot. A few minutes later, alone in the Tesla, my Tesla, I thought if there was any kind of moral to this story. Was it that Americans are all basically the same on the outside, like black on black electric vehicles, and really just have subtle differences on the inside, so there's no reason to be mad at each other despite our political preferences? I decided not to drive back to the parking lot to test out that metaphor on my fellow Tesla owner and the giant tow truck guy. Instead, I just drove home, I turned on the TV, and ate a reheated dinner with my wife, which tasted especially delicious as we watched our president begin to lose the election.